I am Elena Morris, 68 years old, a mother who dedicated her entire life to raising two children. David, 42, a successful lawyer. Hannah, 38, a perfect wife on social media. But in real life, just a controlling manipulator. And me? After my husband's sudden death, I became something between a burden and a house decoration in my daughter's home. That morning, everything began with one tiny detail, a detail that peeled back the truth I had tried so hard not to see. I was sitting at the kitchen table, struggling to open a bottle of joint medication when I heard whispers in the hallway. Hannah's voice, "Mom doesn't know. She's tired all the time, confused and forgetful. The doctor already said this is dangerous if we leave it like this." Then David's voice, quieter but sharper. "I've read all of Mom's medical files. If her condition is really what the doctor says, we need to make arrangements before things get worse." My heart froze. Medical files? How did they get them? I pushed myself up, leaning on the counter as the silence in the house thickened heavy, like a storm about to break. When I stepped out, both of them immediately went quiet and plastered on fake smiles. Hannah came toward me, touching my hand like some TV actress. "Mom, sit down and rest. You've looked exhausted these past few days." I looked straight into her eyes. "What were you two talking about?" David glanced at Hannah, then said, "Nothing, Mom, just your future." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Your future, in their mouths, was never something pleasant. 3 days later, the truth revealed itself. That evening, I heard voices in the living room, a deep, firm voice belonging to a man I didn't know. "If Mrs. Morris signs, you two will have full authority over her assets. That includes the Maple Hill house, her savings, and her husband's death compensation." I stood frozen behind the wall. Hannah laughed softly. "My mom will sign. She's very weak. We just need to add a little gentle pressure." David responded. "Ill handle the medical justification. Mild dementia, memory decline. The records say it clearly." My breath caught. What records? I had never been diagnosed with dementia. I had never allowed any doctor to share my information with them. I don't know how long I stood there. When I heard chairs moving, I backed into the shadows, trembling like someone who had just stepped away from the edge of a cliff. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled open the old drawer under my bed and took out the dark blue folder, the medical file I had kept since my husband died. The real file. The real results. I opened page after page. No dementia. No memory decline. No weakness, they claimed. I closed the folder and placed my hand on the cover. My hand trembled, but not from fear, from something else. A feeling I had forgotten long ago. I am not helpless. The next morning something shook me awake. A white envelope slid under my door. I opened it. It was the full power of attorney document, my name already printed, only missing a signature. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Hannah. "Mom, just sign it. Things will be easier for all of us." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I folded the envelope, and I knew I would not cry. Not this time. Because I understood. If they thought I was weak prey, then it was time for them to see the face I had hidden for 4 years. The side of me my husband once warned them about before he died. "Elena, when they push you to the edge, you'll become someone even they should fear." That day, I called one person. The only person I still trusted, Michael Grant, my late husband's closest friend, and a lawyer specializing in asset protection. When he heard what happened, he stayed silent for a long time. Then he asked, "Elena, are you sure you're ready to do this?" I looked in the mirror. A 8-year-old woman's face, but eyes no longer trembling. "Michael, I'm not just ready. I've been waiting for this." On the other end, he sighed. Then his tone turned firm. "All right. I'll come tomorrow, and we'll begin. But Elena, be prepared. When the truth in your records comes out, your family will never be the same." I smiled thin, calm, certain. Good. I don't want things to stay the same. End of part 1. Before we continue this stormy chapter, I want to ask you for a small favor. If anything in this story stirs something inside you, a familiar pain, an injustice you once endured, or simply the thought, "I've been in her place before," please hit like, subscribe to the Voices of Auntie Tae channel, and tell me which city and country you're listening from. Every comment you leave doesn't just help the story spread, it reminds me that somewhere in this world there are people who understand the hearts of mothers and grandmothers who have been overlooked for far too long. Thank you. Now, let's step into part 2. The next morning, I sat in my quiet living room, listening to the clock tick slow, steady, but heavy. Each tick felt like a countdown to the moment everything would explode. Around 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Michael Grant standing there, sharp eyes, a thick folder under his arm, his face as serious as someone walking into a courtroom. "Elena, shall we begin?" I nodded and stepped aside for him to enter. Michael sat at the dining table. He placed the folders down, each paper tapping the wood like a verdict waiting to be announced. "I'll be direct," he started. "Your children are preparing to file a petition for legal guardianship. If approved, your assets will no longer be yours." I had guessed it, but hearing him confirm it still pierced my heart. "But," Michael continued, opening a blue folder, "this medical record will save you." I recognized it instantly, the file I had kept all these years. "They fabricated everything?" I asked. Michael nodded. "The doctor they cited has never treated you. They used old records from someone else and provided false information to imply cognitive decline." My chest tightened with cold disbelief. "So, they planned this long ago?" "Not just planned," Michael said, sliding a printed email toward me. "I found this. The subject line, guardianship discussion, financial plan after mother signs. Below it was a timeline dividing my assets, plans to sell my house, and using my late husband's death compensation to cover David's firm's debts." I didn't move. The pain in me didn't grow, it transformed into something still, dangerously still. That afternoon, Hannah came home. She opened the door aggressively, as if she owned the entire house. When she saw Michael, she stopped cold. "Why is he here?" she snapped. Michael rose calmly, unsettlingly composed. "I am Mrs. Elena's attorney," Hannah scoffed. "Attorney? My mother doesn't need an attorney. We're just trying to help her organize her life." I looked her straight in the eyes that had always softened me for years, but today, they were empty. "Hannah, I want to ask one question," I said slowly, clearly. "Where did you send my medical records? And why is there a doctor I've never met?" Her expression shifted instantly. "What are you talking about?" "You're mistaken." Michael pushed the real file forward. "We have the original, and all signs point to tampering with medical information for personal gain." Hannah stepped back. I didn't do anything." "That was David." Michael replied, "We will speak to David tomorrow, but before that, I suggest you tell the truth." Hannah bit her lip, but said nothing more. That night, David came home. He didn't waste time, he tossed his briefcase onto the table. "What are you doing, Mom, calling a lawyer? Trying to humiliate us publicly?" I stayed calm. "I just want to know why you think I'm incapable." David laughed, empty, brittle. "You're 68. Alone. Frail. Forgetful. Living alone is dangerous. I'm just thinking ahead." Michael spoke up. "Thinking ahead or calculating, David?" David spun around, face flushed. "You're not family. Stay out of this." Michael opened another folder. "Here is your financial projection, sent to the asset manager, planning to sell your mother's house next quarter." David fell silent. I looked at him for a long time. A very long time. I no longer saw a 42-year-old man. I saw the little boy I once held, the child who trembled with fever, the child who cried in my arms after falling off his bike, and now, that same boy wanted to strip his mother of everything. Around 10 p.m., the house fell into a deep, heavy silence. Hannah sat in the corner, pale. David stood by the window, hands on his hips, trying to hide his panic. Finally, he turned around. "Mom, you can resist for a few days, but the law will be on our side. In the end, you'll have to sign." I stood up, slowly, deliberately. I met his gaze and spoke each word with precision. "I'm not the woman you think I am anymore." Then I placed the real medical file on the table, gently, like setting a knife onto the wood, before saying, "My truth will destroy every plan you've made." For the first time, I saw David step back, not out of shock, but out of fear. End of part 2. Before we move forward, if this story makes you angry on behalf of the mother, or if you see echoes of your own life in hers, please like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Your support is the strength that keeps these stories alive. Thank you. Now, we enter part 3. 2 days after that confrontation, the atmosphere in the house shifted completely. Hannah became cautious, moving quietly as if afraid to touch anything that might expose more guilt. David stayed silent, no longer projecting authority. But I knew this silence wasn't remorse, it was preparation for the next blow. On the third morning, as I was making chamomile tea, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mrs. Elena Morris? This is a social worker from the Maple Hill Adult Protective Office. We received a petition for guardianship from your 2 children. My hand tightened around the hot teapot handle. So they really filed it, fast, cold, confident, as if I were incapable of fighting back. Yes, I'm listening, I replied, my voice steady though my heart raced. We will need to meet with you to assess your health, cognitive ability, and living environment. They said it as if I were an old piece of furniture, a wobbly table about to be thrown out. I smiled. A small, cold smile. Very well, but I have legal representation. He will arrange the meeting. A pause. An attorney? Yes. Attorney Michael Grant. Another pause, longer this time. Understood, ma'am. We will wait for his call. I hung up and sat down. The whole kitchen fell silent. A silence filled with strength. 20 minutes later, David entered the kitchen. Dressed in a suit and tie, clearly preparing for court. Who was that? He asked casually. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. A social worker. They're coming to assess me. A flicker crossed David's face. He hadn't expected me to know so soon. Mom, don't misunderstand. This is necessary to ensure you're properly cared for. I placed the real medical file on the table again, slowly, deliberately, like a loaded weapon. David glanced at it, his face paled. I asked, David, what are you afraid of? He laughed weakly. I'm not afraid of anything. Then why are you shaking? The question was soft but so sharp he couldn't hide the tiny tremor in his hand. Hannah appeared in the doorway, phone in hand. She had heard everything. All right, Mom, Hannah said. We don't want to fight. We just want you safe. That's all. I turned to her. Safe? Or silent while you do whatever you want? Hannah swallowed hard. In the afternoon, Michael arrived. He carried a large file bag, his voice calm. Elena, we must prepare. They will try everything to prove you're incompetent. I raised an eyebrow. They have no evidence. Michael looked at me, conflicted. Elena, you're strong. But they're your children. And when family wants to bring someone down, they don't stop at the truth. That sentence stabbed me for a moment. Yes, my own children had gone that far. Michael laid papers before me. Tomorrow you'll face a cognitive test, medical evaluation, and an independent interview. But remember one thing. He met my eyes directly. Any intense emotional reaction can be used against you. I sighed. Michael, I've lived through loss, betrayal, and years of loneliness. I think I can manage calm. He nodded. Good. Because if we pass this assessment, David and Hannah's plan collapses instantly. That night, after the sky fell into a deep blue, I stepped into the backyard. The air was cold but soothing. Wind rustled through the trees, a reminder that I was still free, at least for now. I looked at the house I had lived in for 32 years. Every step, every window held memories of my husband. When he was alive, he used to say, Elena, this house will protect you, and if one day it can't, you must be stronger than it. Tonight, I understood that sentence in a completely new way. I held the real medical file to my chest. I felt the bitterness and strength rising inside me, not fear, determination. As I walked back inside, David stood in the hallway. His eyes no longer avoided mine. No guilt, only anger from being cornered. You think you've won? He asked slowly. Tomorrow is the real test, and you're not mentally stable enough to pass. I stood before him, smaller, older, but with eyes he had never seen on me before. It's not that I'm not stable, David, I said. It's that you don't understand me. He frowned. I tilted my head, whispering just loud enough. I'm not the weak one in this story. I'm the one you should never have underestimated." He froze. For the first time, I saw real worry in his eyes. A wind passed through the hallway. Gentle, but enough to signal that tomorrow, nothing would be the same. End of part 3. Before we move into the next part, the part where the truth begins to shake every plan they carefully built, if this story makes you feel angry, heartbroken, or simply reminds you of the times you were treated as less than you deserve, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're listening from. Your presence is what helps me keep telling the stories that so many mothers out there are too afraid to put into words. Thank you. Now, let's step into part 4. The morning of the assessment came faster than I expected. The sky over Maple Hill was gloomy, gray clouds crawling across it like they were warning of a storm not just outside, but inside this very house. I sat at the kitchen table, cardigan straightened, hair neatly tied back. I needed to show up as who I truly was, clear-minded, calm, unshakable. Michael arrived at 8:15, as professional as ever. He brought a stack of documents and a cup of hot coffee. "Elena, today we need 3 things: calm, accuracy, and honesty," he said. I nodded. "Michael, I've been calm for years. It's just that no one ever noticed." He smiled a rare smile in these tense days. Around 9, the doorbell rang. 2 social workers and a doctor stood there. They carried questionnaires, tablets, and that serious air of people who believe they're about to decide someone's fate. David stood behind them, full of confidence. Hannah hovered behind his shoulder, her eyes darting to me again and again, as if checking whether I was trembling. I wasn't. "We're here to assess Mrs. Elena Morris' cognitive abilities and her capacity for self-care," one of the social workers said. I gave a small smile. "I'm ready. I'm one." The memory test. They asked me, "What's today's date? What's the name of the street you live on? Who is the current governor of this state? Do you remember the last time you visited a doctor?" I answered each question clearly, steadily, like the ticking of the clock in the living room. David stood with his arms crossed, but I could see his eyes starting to lose that confident focus replaced by worry. Hannah bit her lip so hard it looked like it might bleed. The doctor wrote notes nonstop, but when he finally looked up, I saw something in his eyes: confusion. "Mrs. Elena," he asked, "can you remember these 3 words? Clock, apple, ocean." "Of course," I replied. Then they moved on to other tasks. 10 minutes later he asked again, "Please repeat the 3 words from earlier." I looked straight at him, calm: clock, apple, ocean. The doctor nodded too quickly, like he had just confirmed something completely opposite to what David had written in his petition. 2. Assessing my ability to care for myself, they asked me to walk a lap around the living room. I did. They asked if I could manage my own finances. I opened a small accounting notebook where I had written out each monthly expense in careful detail. They checked the kitchen, the medicine cabinet, the bathroom, to see if I was living safely. Everything was orderly, clean, and logical. Hannah started shifting from foot to foot. David turned his head away, avoiding my eyes. 3. The critical moment. The doctor opened my file, the fake one David had attached to the application. "Mrs. Elena," he asked, "you were diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, correct?" I lifted my head. This moment was the knife they thought would finish me. I placed my real medical file in front of him, opened to last year's evaluation page. "This is the official report from my family doctor. There is no indication of cognitive decline whatsoever." David stepped forward. "That file isn't updated. Mom is trying to." Michael raised his hand to cut him off. "Doctor, please check the stamp, the signature, and the patient ID number." The room went so quiet we could hear the ticking of the clock. The doctor checked each page. His eyes grew wider. Then he said, "This file is completely valid. And it is very different from the file our office received." David turned pale. Hannah practically collapsed into her chair. The social workers exchanged glances, confused, and now, suspicious. I said nothing. I just sat there, like a mother who had finally been given back her right to speak. 4. The first explosion. The doctor closed the file, looked at me, then at David. "Mr. David Morris, who provided these falsified records to you?" David said nothing. He couldn't. Hannah whispered, I I just did what David told me. Michael stood up. I request this be noted in the record. Evidence suggests intentional falsification of medical information to support a guardianship request. The social worker nodded and quickly wrote it down. I looked at my 2 children. Not with satisfaction. Not with rage. Just with a sadness so deep that even the wind at the window couldn't reach it. And in that moment, I knew our family would never be the same again. If, listening to this, you feel a lump in your throat, if you've ever been dismissed, silenced, or stripped of your voice in your own family, please subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tae, and tell me where you're listening from. Every response from you helps me keep telling these stories filled with truth and courage. Thank you so much. I'll see you in part 5, where the truth doesn't just come out, it begins to demand a price. There are moments in life when you realize a painful truth. It isn't strangers who hurt you the most. It's the very people you spent your whole life raising. And the next part of this story is the moment I finally saw who my children really were. Not when they were lying, but when they started to fear the truth I held in my hands. Part 5. The beginning. After the assessment ended, the social workers gathered their papers and stood up. No one said anything out loud, but everyone knew something had just collapsed. David watched them walk to the door. No longer able to hold on to his usual calm. His breathing was heavy, his hands clenched into fists. Hannah stood frozen, like someone being pulled out of a beautiful dream, realizing things were not going the way she expected. As soon as the door closed, I said, "David, do you want to explain?" He spun around, eyes bloodshot. "Explain what?" "You're turning all of this into a public humiliation," I frowned. "Is it me? Or is it the truth?" David slammed his hand on the table. "You don't understand. I'm trying to save you. You live alone. You're not as clear-minded as you used to be." Hannah jumped in, voice shaking. "We just want what's best for you." Michael looked at them both, arms crossed. "If that were true, you wouldn't have falsified her medical records." The room fell into a strange kind of silence. No wind, no ticking clock, just the sound of my son's heavy breathing. 1. The phone vibrates, and another truth explodes. While David was arguing, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and his face went white. I asked, "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. Hannah peeked at the phone and gasped. "David, they're investigating?" He snapped. "Be quiet!" I stepped closer. "Investigating what?" David swallowed hard. His voice lost its confidence. "It has nothing to do with you." Michael spoke up. "I just received an email from the guardianship office. They're reviewing the origin of the medical records and some of the financial documents you submitted." Hannah turned to David, panic in her eyes. "David, you told me it was just procedure. You said nobody would look too closely." David hissed. "I said be quiet. I'm thinking." I shook my head. "Thinking about what, David? Thinking how to strip me of everything? Thinking how to turn me into an obstacle you can legally remove from your path?" He glared at me, eyes burning red. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. You don't understand how much I've sacrificed." I sighed, a sigh holding decades of motherhood, and the weight of bitter disappointment, too. The real reason my son wanted guardianship. Michael slowly opened his briefcase. "Elena, you need to prepare yourself. There is another reason David wants control of your assets." My heart pounded as I turned toward him. David roared, "You're not telling her." Michael continued, "David's firm is on the brink of bankruptcy. He needs money to cover a debt he's been hiding from the family." I stood completely still. Hannah cried out, "David! You told me everything was fine. You said it was just a temporary cash flow issue." David almost fell apart. I didn't want to lose everything. Mom has money. Her house is valuable. I just needed her to sign. That's all." I looked at my son, the one I once believed would step up and carry the family after his father died. Turns out, the way he planned to carry us was by holding a knife to the very person who gave him life. 3. The final crack. Softly, I said, "David, if you had come to me, told me the truth, begged for help, I might have helped you. But you chose to take away my freedom instead. You chose deception." David collapsed into a chair. Sweat rolled down his temples. I didn't have a choice," I replied. You did. You had many choices, but you chose the one that made me no longer recognize you. Hannah broke into tears. We're finished. Michael stood up. No, the only ones finished are the ones who broke the law. Elena, you just proved you are fully competent, and that truth will destroy their entire plan. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at my two children as if they were distant shadows, people I once knew, now blurred beyond recognition. A breeze drifted in through the window, soft, but enough to signal that the real battle was only just beginning. If part 5 made your chest tighten, if you've ever been betrayed by family, dismissed, or used, please subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tae, and tell me where you're listening from. Your presence is what keeps stories like this from being buried in silence. I'll see you in part 6, where the cost of their actions finally begins to show. People say, truth is like the sun. You can hide it for a while, but never forever. And in this part, that sun, the truth my children tried to bury under a pile of forged documents, finally rose and burned through every lie they thought would keep me quiet. Today, there is nowhere left for them to hide. Part 6. Begin. After the truth about David's debts came out, the house fell into a suffocating silence. David sat with his head in his hands. Hannah was so panicked she could barely stand. Michael remained still, watching like someone who knew an even bigger wave was about to crash. I looked at my two children, and for the first time, they felt like strangers to me. I asked, David, why didn't you tell me the truth? He wouldn't look at me. His voice was raw. Because you've already given me too much, I couldn't bring myself to ask for more. I just thought, if I could control your assets, everything would be easier. I stood in front of him. So you chose to strip me of my rights? To turn me into someone incompetent? You call that easier? David had no answer. 1. Hannah reveals what David hid. Suddenly, Hannah dropped her hands from her face and spoke softly, her voice trembling. Elena, there's something else. Something David hasn't told you yet. David snapped his head up. Hannah, don't. But Hannah burst into tears. I can't take it anymore. You have to know. You need to know. Otherwise, you'll never understand what's really happening. I turned to Hannah, my heart pounding. What is it? She spoke between broken breaths. If David doesn't repay that loan within 45 days, they'll file a lawsuit against him and use this house as additional collateral. I froze. This house is in my name. Hannah nodded. Yes, but David signed a guarantee using it as backing. They haven't enforced it yet, but they have the right to if it goes to court. My throat tightened. David shot to his feet. I had no choice. If I go bankrupt, I lose everything. I just needed you to sign the papers. After that, it would all be fine. Michael cut him off. No, if Elena signs, they'll take her entire life away. David screamed, like an animal cornered. So what? What does she need the money for? She's old. What's the point of such a big house? She lives alone. What does she need it for? Those words stabbed straight into my heart like a blade. I froze. This house is in my name. Hannah nodded. Yes, but David signed a guarantee, using it as backing. They haven't enforced it yet, but they have the right to. If it goes to court. My throat tightened. David shot to his feet. I had no choice. If I go bankrupt, I lose everything. I just needed you to sign the papers. After that, it would all be fine. Michael cut him off. No, if Elena signs, they'll take her entire life away. David screamed, like an animal cornered. So what? What does she need the money for? She's old. What's the point of such a big house? She lives alone. What does she need it for? Those words stabbed straight into my heart like a blade. I asked, What do you mean? Michael replied, Disinheriting them or filing for a protective guardianship in your favor. Hannah gasped. No, please, Elena, please don't. Please don't do that. I didn't do anything. It was all David. David turned to her. You're putting all of this on me? Hannah sobbed harder. I don't want to lose everything. Michael watched them both, then spoke quietly. Elena, you see it now. The issue isn't just forged documents. Your children were willing to sacrifice you, to save themselves. His words dropped to the floor like a sentence being handed down. 3. The phone call that sends everything to rock bottom. Right then, Michael's phone rang. He listened for a moment, nodded, then hung up. He turned to me. Elena, we have the preliminary conclusion from this morning's assessment. The whole room held its breath. David jumped up. Well? What did they say? Michael looked straight at me. They concluded that you, Mrs. Elena, are fully competent. And they suspect the records David submitted show signs of falsification. They're opening a preliminary investigation. Hannah collapsed back into her chair. David stepped backward, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I just stood there, my heart as calm as a lake after a storm. And I knew this was only the beginning of the end for my children. If Part 6 made your chest tighten, if you've ever been treated unfairly, looked down on, or used by your own family, please hit like, subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tae, and comment where you're listening from. Every interaction from you helps me keep telling the stories that so many others are still too afraid to speak aloud. I'll see you in Part 7, where the consequences finally begin. There are wounds that don't sit on the skin. They live in those moments, when the person you love most chooses their own interests over you. And this part is when those wounds finally begin to bleed. Part 7, begin. After Michael announced the preliminary result of the assessment, the room fell into a heavy silence, so heavy we could hear the minute hand ticking on the wall. David stood in the middle of the room, arms hanging at his sides like someone who had just lost his last support. Hannah slumped into a chair, her face chalk white. I didn't say anything, I just watched. Watched the reactions I never thought I'd see in my own children. 1. David starts blaming. David turned to Hannah, anger blazing in his eyes. You told me everything was prepared. You said no one checks the records in detail. Hannah burst into tears. I only did what you told me. You gave me the files. You told me to sign. So I did. None of this is just on me. David shouted. This is all your fault. You pushed me into this. Michael tapped lightly on the table. Both of you. Quiet. Every word you say right now could end up in an investigation report. They both fell silent. Not out of love. Not out of respect. But out of fear. 2. I demand the last of the truth. I looked at Michael, then at my children. I want to know the whole truth. No hiding, no dodging. David turned his face away. Hannah wiped her tears, her voice shaking. Elena, there's one more thing. I slowly sat down across from them. Say it. Hannah clenched her hands together. It's not just David's firm that's in trouble. His debt isn't just with the bank. My heart tightened. What do you mean? David shouted. Hannah, stop! But Hannah couldn't stop anymore. She was like someone who had carried a secret for too long and finally snapped. David borrowed money from a private finance group with very high interest. If he doesn't pay, they'll come after him. And he thought, if he had guardianship over your assets, they wouldn't dare touch him. The room went cold, like all the warmth had been sucked out. I looked at David. For a long time, a look that left him nowhere to hide. David, I asked, gently but sharp as a knife, you dragged me into a debt I had nothing to do with, just to shield yourself? He didn't answer. And sometimes, silence is the clearest confession. 3. Michael's words change everything. Michael leaned back in his chair. Fingers laced together. Elena, I'm going to say this once. Your family is facing serious legal and financial risk. If the people David owes start applying pressure, you could be affected. I clenched my hands. You mean, they could come to this house? Michael nodded. It's possible. A chill ran down my spine. This house, the only real home I have left. The place where my husband closed his eyes for the last time. The place I held my children when they were small. And now, my son had put it in danger. David grabbed his hair, fingers digging in. I didn't want you involved. You have to believe me. I just wanted to save the firm. I just wanted things to be better. I shook my head. David, you didn't want to save me. You wanted to save yourself. He choked. No denial, no excuse. And that silence said everything. 4. Hannah desperately clings to me. Hannah dropped to her knees and grabbed my hands. Elena, please, please don't turn us in. Please don't cut us out of the inheritance. I was wrong. I was foolish. I just followed David because I was afraid of losing everything. I pulled my hands away. Hannah, you're not afraid of losing me. You're afraid of losing money. She broke down, sobbing. 5. David asks the most painful question. David looked at me, his eyes red, his voice hoarse. Mom, do you still see me as your son? I took a long breath. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, David, I have always loved you, but love doesn't mean blindness. If you turn me into a victim to save yourself, then you walked away from being my son a long time ago. He collapsed into the chair, shoulders shaking. Michael stood up. Elena, we need to prepare for the next step. This situation has gone far beyond the original line. I nodded. Inside me, there was no longer a storm, just one cold, clear truth. When a mother is pushed to her final boundary, she doesn't seek revenge. She saves herself. If Part 7 made your heart ache for this mother, if you know what it feels like to be used or pushed to the edge by your own family, please subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tae, and comment where you're listening from. Every comment you leave doesn't just help the story spread. It tells other mothers out there that they are not alone. I'll see you in Part 8, where the legal battle officially begins.